Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy and Force Development. Elbridge Colby is the author of The Strategy of Denial, American Defense in an Age of Great Power Conflict. He says, how can you isolate Russia? Isn't that exactly what America and the West are trying to do?
It's a futile attempt.
Well, I think in substantial part, and Russia's, of course, brought that on itself. I mean, I think the Russians are already seeing the consequences of worldwide condemnation. But I agree with the other guest who was suggesting that, or indicating that China bears a lot of responsibility for this. And, I mean, I think in the case of both America and India, we need to continue to grow closer together and to keep our focus on China, which is, of course, 10 times the size of the GDP of Russia. And now, of course, the Russians, without a lot of external outlets, are now going to be even more dependent on China, which makes China even more of a danger to both of us, as well as to Japan, Vietnam, Australia, Taiwan, South Korea, et cetera.
But at this point of time, Mr. Colby, with the nuclear saber rattling, can I suggest something? I feel the entire West has to come to the table, because 3 rounds of talks were held between Ukraine and Russia over the war. It's been going on. War is going on 5 days. The West is missing from the table. The West cannot shoot from the shoulders of Zelensky anymore. Mr. Colby, UK, US, France, Germany, NATO must come on the table and talk to Putin if he wants that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think, Putin has launched an aggressive invasion of his neighbor, and they're fighting for their independence. So I think we're going to continue to support them. I mean, we'll support the Ukrainians in a position. Obviously, we all have an interest in avoiding a nuclear war, God forbid, or something like that. So we shouldn't do something to precipitate that. But that would be totally unreasonable and aggressive escalation by Russia to go to that point. So, I mean, what exactly the diplomatic formalities are, I think at this point we need to make very clear that we support Ukraine in its resistance to an abominable act of aggression. I mean, that was, unprovoked, and we shouldn't countenance it.
Okay, do I have Maxim Sukhov, please? I'm just checking if I have the audio-video line through both with Mr. Maxim Sukhov. Can you hear me, sir, Maxim? Yeah,
I can hear you.
Since I was having a problem with the audio with Dmitry from Moscow, that's how I was checking. So Maxim, bottom line is, are you not afraid at this moment of being internationally isolated? The ruble has tanked 30%. It's going to fall more. Your interest rates are over 20%. Already. Dmitry, is that not true?
What kind of international isolation are you talking? I mean, this is joke. The majority of the world does not oppose, does not condemn Russia. The world is no longer unipolar. It is no longer hegemonic. China, India, Brazil, the overwhelming majority of non-Western countries, they didn't oppose the Russian actions. What kind of international isolation? I mean, it is just amusing.
So you feel that there will be no impact of any financial sanctions? If that is the case, Mr. Suslov, can you tell me why the Russian ruble tanked 30% versus the dollar in offshore trading?
Well, the impact of the Western sanctions is this. The West has completely exhausted any sanctions that it can use vis-a-vis Russia. Because the sanctions that we've witnessed thus far are probably the final sanctions. The only 2 remaining tools in the Western disposals are, first, trade embargo, which is unacceptable because, for instance, European Union, 1/3 of the gas that European Union consumes is Russian gas, and Russia is the major exporter of oil to the world markets. So trade embargo is unaffordable for the West. The second instrument that the West can use is nuclear war, which is also unaffordable. All the rest sanctions have already been put in place. And
Wait,
now
no.
the Western leverage over the Russian behavior is zero.
Okay. So you're saying that the West, the rest of the world, Europe, NATO, America, no country has any economic lever over Russia at all. But our friend just said that the Russian economy is 1/10 the size of the Chinese economy.
Absolutely.
Are you sure China won't have a lever on you either? Are you sure China won't have a lever on you?
Well, Russia is the sixth economy in the world in terms of the power purchasing parity. Of course, there will be some negative impact of the secondary sanctions, even to the Russian-Chinese economic relations, as well as to Russian economic relations to the other countries. And of course, Russia will feel significant economic pain. And Russian economic development will be severely jeopardized by the sanctions that have been imposed. I'm just saying that the impact of those
But then tell
sanctions
me,
on Russian
if you're
foreign
so,
policy
if you're,
will, I think, be counterproductive. Because if before the position
okay, so that is, Mr. Suslov, that is your perspective, but I would just like to tell you, and you can take a completely different perspective. My information was today that the Russian bank, Share Bank, its shares plunged almost 80%. 80% as Western sanctions threatened to cripple your financial system. I'm sure there are some things there which perhaps you may be underestimating. I'd like to get a view from Peter Kuznick, Professor Kuznick, please, because at the core of this response from Russia is a confidence that it has enough reserves, enough financial reserves. It's obviously planned for this. And it's probably is true, because if Putin would have been doing this, he would have planned for this. He's probably spoken about this with the Chinese. It's been well thought of, including everything that could go wrong. Professor Kuznick, please.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. Putin has certainly been planning for this, but I think he is delusional. When I listen to what he's been saying over the past week or 10 days, he seems to be disconnected from reality. This is not the same Putin who I've listened to for years, who was cold, calculating, rational, not a risk taker. The things he's been saying lately about Nazis and controlling Ukraine and drug dealers and Ukraine not being an independent country and now putting the nuclear forces on high alert, I'm very worried about Putin's mental stability right now. The way he isolates himself, he's been isolated for a couple of years. He's getting bad information. This is not the same Putin who I've been trying to understand and for the past couple of years. So he might think he's planned for this, but what he's done is he's united his enemies against him. He's weakened Russia. He's destroyed Russia's moral position in the world. He had a very good argument about NATO expansion and about Ukraine. And I kept on urging him to declare victory and pull those forces back from the border and start negotiating. The world was finally listening to what Putin was saying about Russia's legitimate national security concerns. And now that's all been undermined in this illegal, immoral invasion of Ukraine. So to me, his figure is appalling. And the last thing he should do from the standpoint of Russia's national interests. At this point, he's the biggest enemy to Russia. He's no longer Russia's voice to the world. He's now been so diminished in all international circles. And those of us who opposed and hated the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the U.S. invasion of Libya, the bombing in Syria. Those are the ones who are now most horrified by what Russia is doing, and this must be stopped immediately. China can play a positive role in this because China recognizes the dangers of NATO expansion, and China has very, very good economic relations with Ukraine. China supports Ukraine's sovereignty. Maybe I'd like to see China and India. Modi doesn't have quite the relation with Ukraine that China does, but he also has still the trust of Russia, and maybe the two of them can step up and talk Putin down before it's a total humanitarian catastrophe.
Maxim, without commenting on what has been said there by Professor Kuznick, there are points of concern. One is the issue about the nuclear button. The casual manner in which Putin keeps saying that we are one of the world's most powerful nuclear states. It's, you know, one has to be a little more careful about the nuclear threat. Secondly, you know, look at the kind of statement that came from the Roscosmos head, who said, if you block cooperation with us, then who will save the International Space Station from an uncontrolled deorbit and from falling into the United States and Europe? What kind of a threat was that? That the International Space Station will fall straight into the United States and Europe? I mean, I am only talking to you, Maxim. Does this sound rational to you, the kind of threats? We can discuss about whether Russia has a threat over Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, whether you'll invade Poland. But nuclear button issues, the kind of statements that came from the Roscosmos head appear to be way beyond extreme.
Well, first of all, I think your listeners and our colleagues in the studio have to understand that Dmitry Rogozin, the head of Roscosmos, is a specific character. You know, he was long Russia's ambassador to NATO. He's known for these extreme sayings and stuff. So, but it's not the subject of the matter here. What's important is, I think, given the complexity and seriousness of the conflict and the situation in which Russia and Ukraine and the West have found themselves over the past few days, the parties are not just going on this escalation ladder or just jumping on this escalation ladder very, very quickly. And that's indeed very concerning. So I think both the statements from President Putin and the head of Roscosmos, Dmitry Rogozin, were pronounced to get the sense of quote-unquote realism in the thinking of the West in calculating their own steps towards Russia, and a quote-unquote a realist reminder that they're not dealing with yet another power in the Middle East that they can afford to destroy. And it's not just another war for Westerners that they can afford to observe on Twitter or on TikTok, but this is a really serious matter that will have costs for anyone. And I think another very dangerous sign here is that Russia is in a situation, and I think President Putin feels it clearly, in which he believes Russia cannot lose at any cost. So all this escalatory rhetoric.
Will he push the nuclear button for that? No, I do understand that Russia cannot lose. It is understood by all on the program tonight that in a way, Russia has then put itself into a corner in a situation today where it realizes it cannot lose. But that the two challenges for Russia are how many civilian casualties will be inflicted, who else will you involve, will you take the conflict beyond Ukraine, and what is this nuclear threat which is now constantly being pushed 5 times a day by Russia? I'd like to get a sense from Kiev. I mean, how does Ms. Kravchuk see this? She's a Ukrainian member of parliament. Ms. Kravchuk, please. How do you see it?
Yes, it was interesting to listen for this discussion. And I would like to say that Ukraine, I'm sorry, I messed up all the plans. If you see at the map, Ukraine is much, much smaller than Russia. And all predicted that Russians will go into Kiev and invade in 2 days. Never happened and will not happen. Because you know what? Today I saw that ballerina of Kiev National Opera took a gun and said she'll be fighting. So you're not fighting just with army. You are fighting with the whole nation, and that is true. Now about Russian isolation, I'm really sorry for those Russians who do not support what Kremlin does, because the Russian authorities are isolating the whole nation. And today, Switzerland, that was neutral to Russia since I think 1815, said they will impose the same sanctions as the European Union. Germany, that was politically supporting and businessly supporting Russia, said they will not buy Russian gas at all. And today we filed the application to join the European Union. Now about neutrality. In 2014, when the Russian invasion and annexation of Crimea happened and invasion into Donbas region, we were neutral. It was written in our constitution. It's not about neutrality. It's about that Putin does not want Ukraine as independent state. But here, the whole nation will be fighting. And, it's very hard to tell because right now Kyiv is being bombed again. Bombed, civilians being bombed. On Russian channels, you will not find the news. You will find that it's a special military operation. We're fighting only with militaries. You know how many children died in just 4 days? 16. 16 children died. Children are being born in bomb shelters. If you see, you might remember the very, very famous picture of London Metro of 1940. Well, that's how every metro in Kharkiv, in Kyiv looks like in 2022. That's the reality. But we believe in our President Zelensky. He proved himself as a great leader. The whole nation supports him, and we're thankful for the whole support of those countries who give it. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
It's just been said, thank you, Ms. Kravchuk. We just heard that the Russian side is saying that the next talks between Moscow and Kiev will be held in a couple of days. What do you anticipate in the next couple of days? Brahma Chelani from Delhi. Brahma Chelani, Professor of Strategic Studies at the Center for Policy Research, please. Yes, Dr. Chelani.
Well, Russia is facing a moment of truth. Its military forces have surrounded Kyiv. Yet, if it were to enter Kyiv, it'll have to engage in urban warfare with Russian forces facing guerrilla attacks and being forced to engage in hand-to-hand combat. And given the fact that Russia sees Ukraine as part of the Russian civilization, I guess Moscow's concern is to minimize civilian casualties. So these talks are essentially about how to avert urban combat, urban warfare. Urban warfare, as we know, is hellish warfare. It will exact a very heavy human toll and leave large parts of any city devastated. So these talks are critical to averting an urban warfare, not just in Kyiv, but also in some other cities that have been surrounded by Russian forces. But to take a larger picture, and we have seen that repeatedly in this century, we keep talking about a rules-based order, but what we have is might makes right even in the 21st century. We've seen China swallow Hong Kong, redraw the geopolitical map of the South China Sea, and jail more than 1 million Muslims in a gulag in Xinjiang, but it has faced no financial sanctions. By contrast, Russia is an easy target for sanctions because of the fact that the US doesn't have much of economic links with Russia. But the issue is whether sanctions can deter Russia in any way when they have failed to prevent the invasion. After all, Biden had unveiled his sanctions plans well before Putin ordered the invasion. Biden had made it clear what kind of sanctions he would impose on Russia if Russia dared to invade Ukraine. Yet the invasion happened. That's because the US, through overuse, has blunted the instrument of sanctions against Russia. Russia has been slapped repeatedly with sanctions. In fact, last year, after Biden took office, he had 2 rounds of sanctions against Russia. So Russia has got used to American-led sanctions. The West has to think of an approach that goes beyond sanctions. Sanctions alone will not change the behavior of Russia under Putin, that's for sure. But there is a larger consequence for countries like India. India may not have a dog in the fight, yet India cannot escape the larger strategic ramifications of the conflict over Ukraine. India's economy already has taken a major hit. But I agree with Elbridge that I think the Asian security is going to be the main loser from the new Cold War that is emerging. And my concern is that this new Cold War, with the Americans now pouring military resources into Europe, is going to compound America's strategic overstretch and distract the US from its main challenger, which is China, not Russia. But more importantly, it will open greater strategic space for China's aggressive revisionism and also help to advance China's economic power and energy security by making Beijing the main beneficiary of the new Western sanctions on Russia.
Could I comment on that?
I want to go back to Mr. Elbridge for a minute, please. Yes, Mr. Elbridge, please go on. You can take that. I just want to add one thing here.
Thank you very much.
One point here, just on the last point which was made here by Dr. Chelani to you, Mr. Elbridge. I think that China moving on Taiwan is a matter of time. Sanctions don't matter. America and the West cannot sanction. They have too much at stake with China. And therefore, what he calls revisionism, I'll put even more directly, it's a matter of weeks and months before China takes advantage of this and pursues its policy in Taiwan. Can the West, America, stand a quiet observer to that as well, Mr. Elbridge?
No, and Dr. Chelani is exactly right to put his finger on this problem. I don't think that we have yet made this mistake, but I am worried about it. And I think it's very important that India and others like Japan and Australia make very clear to the United States that we must not only continue our focus on Asia, really amplify our focus on Asia, because the Chinese are far more powerful than the Russians, as dangerous as the Russians are, and they are dangerous to our interests. But we have to prioritize Asia, and the threat, as you indicated, sir, is very real to Taiwan. We may already be in the window where the Chinese might decide to move. The Taiwan defense minister himself said that they might be. And I think their primary assessment is exactly as Dr. Chelani put it. It's not going to be economic sanctions because they will be resilient. We have much more vulnerability to sanctions. It's the largest economy in the world alongside ourselves. So we must have an effective military capability. And that's about the Taiwanese, of course, and the Japanese, but really about our focus. So what we need to do, and what I wrote in Time Magazine here in the United States, and I am pushing this argument very hard, is we need to respond in Europe, but primarily by getting the Europeans to step up. And this is happening. So there is positive momentum, particularly from the Poles and the Germans, and of course, the Ukrainians' heroic efforts themselves. So we should support that, but we need to focus our efforts on Asia, and this is where our partnership with India must deepen, our alliance with Japan, etc. So my only caution to Dr. Chelani's point is that the situation is not lost.
My concern is,
but it is a serious challenge.
No, my concern is, however, Mr. Elbridge, that we have a situation. You're talking about the increased responsibility of your European allies of the United Kingdom, and we hear that Boris Johnson may be going to Poland and Estonia and, meeting the Polish tomorrow. But my concern is all of this is happening at a time when, as most of our panelists have said, and I'd like to go to Dmitry next, Putin cannot afford to lose. And he cannot even afford to be losing perceptually. And as we are talking about all this, some massive explosions being reported, lots of bombing being reported in and around Kiev, ladies and gentlemen. I just saw some pictures. We'll try and put it up. Getting news of some surface-to-air missiles being launched by air defenses somewhere near the Kiev region. We've seen explosions in other adjoining cities as well. So I feel that maybe the talks need to be expanded rather than get, and those are the pictures, ladies and gentlemen. These are the adjoining cities. These pictures have just come in, and this is what is said to be a missile strike in Brovary, where the Russians are said to have struck a military radar communications center in Brovary. That's the latest visual coming in. But will a larger conversation help, Dmitry? Can there be a broader conversation beyond just the talks with Ukraine? Mr. Suslov, you can hear me? I think your audio is muted. I'm not getting your audio. I think your audio is muted. Can you check that again?
Something with
Have you muted your audio anyway? Yeah, now you're back. Go on.
Yeah, okay. I think that the only rationale for those talks is humanitarian issues, I'm sorry, but I hear my voice back, and it's extremely difficult to talk on this.
We'll try and fix that. Could you try again, Mr. Suslov?
I will try again. So the only rationale for those talks is to avoid humanitarian sufferings. No, I'm sorry, but I cannot talk in conditions when my voice is coming back to me.
Okay, we'll just fix that. We'll fix that. We'll fix that technically. Can I put that to Maxim? Can I put the same question to Maxim?
About the broader agenda, you're talking about Russia and the West. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I think what's happening now is a third attempt in the course of Putin's presidency over the 20+ years of his presidency to revise the European security order that was in place ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Two previous attempts ended in wars also, one in 2008 and another one shortly after 2014. Now we're seeing the third attempt over the failure of diplomatic efforts to set up this security architecture. And I think what the kind of response that we see from the West suggests, bluntly speaking, the response is really about "quote unquote" deplatforming Russia from all of the West-dominated institutions and social, economic, and others. So that, in my view, leaves little space for any broader agenda for now. Perhaps the only thing that's on the table for Russia and the United States and the West broadly to talk about is to ensure that that there is no unintended or unprovoked nuclear strike and a nuclear disaster. But that's a lot, but also very little at the same time. So I have a very grim overview for how things will work out between Russia and the West.
But Maxim, it's quite clear it's quite clear that is Putin's very last card. If Russia has the upper hand, then Anders, my question is, if Russia has the upper hand and Anders is the publisher of the Journal of Political Risk, then why is he pulling out that last card?
Exactly. He doesn't have the upper hand. His military is weak. His economy is weak. It's getting weaker by the day, as you pointed out rightly. You know, his best ally is China, which is about to stab him in the back. So, you know, I think what we're seeing here is a last gasp, dying gasp of the Soviet Empire.
I'll get Dmitry. Dmitry wants to respond to you. I think he heard that, and I hope the audio line is fixed. Yes, Mr. Suslov, please.
I think that the Russian military is today one of the strongest, maybe after the American one, but after the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, even this is hardly arguable in comparison with the Russian quite successful military operation in Syria. This is first point. Second point, on the pace of the Ukrainian operation. According to the U.S. intelligence, American intelligence, Russia is currently using only 50% of the troops that Russia has concentrated around the Ukrainian border. Only today we have started to use aviation on a broader scale. So I'm pretty sure that the end of this operation is quite near. As for the broader negotiations between Russia and the West, you know, first, we have to keep in mind that the current war is a direct result of the collapse of those negotiations because the West has been assuming over many years that Russian fundamental dissatisfaction with the development of the European security system after the end of the Cold War would kind of dissolve by itself. And it is absolutely ahistoric. I mean, the conflict, the tension was growing, and now it has finally exploded. So as for the broader conversations, I think there will be a space and necessity for the broader conversations, and they will be devoted to the management of the very serious confrontation which we are now observing and will continue to observe between Russia and the West, because this confrontation will have to be managed, as the previous confrontation between the Soviet Union and the West will also needed to be managed. And, of course, you know, arms control, strategic stability, deconfliction. By the way, the United States has already proposed deconfliction mechanism between Russia and the United States. So, of course, these kinds of measures will be taken. The second area for Russia-West agenda in the observable future will be simply trade. So strategic stability and trade, nothing else, because we have a very, very fundamental breakdown in the relations. You know, this is the change of the paradigm which has happened over the last.
From Kiev. From Kiev.
Yeah, just let me finish.
From Kiev,
thing,
we are getting reports of major missile attacks. We got some pictures coming in. I'd like to ask Ms. Kravchuk from Kiev what she's hearing and how the people in Kiev are holding out. We are getting reports of missile attacks in and around Kiev, which seem to be intensifying. So quite clearly, while the talks are going on, the pounding and the bombing is going to also get worse before the next round of talks, please. Ms. Kravchuk.
Well, it's clearly that Putin doesn't have anything. I hear myself as well, but if you can fix it.
We'll try and fix that. We'll try and fix that. I'll reduce the audio here. Please try and continue, even if you have to go slowly. Yes.
Yes, it looks like that there is nothing on the table, just sending missiles. And Mr. Suslov just lied to your eyes, because on 24th of February, I woke up in Kiev at 5 in the morning from the missile. So Russians have been using missiles from the very, very beginning. And today they bombed, they shelled Kharkiv, not military base, but places where people live. And a woman was killed in her kitchen. Her legs were cut off, and she died not even getting into the hospital. That's the reality. And also, Mr. Suslov slipped. I think the plan of Putin is to go on with bombing of civilians, and that's how they see how probably the president or the militaries would give up. But we understand this plan, and our kids are not in the schools right now, but in the shelters and in the basements. And all what you do is war crimes. These war crimes will be, I'm sure, investigated in the Hague Tribunal, and we'll get to it. But I'm really sorry for the Russian people from who you steal in their future, because you are stealing their future in this very time. And you are showing queues in Kiev for food. Well, show queues in Moscow for money exchange. The ruble is, what we say, I don't know if you'll understand, but my Russians, so to say, colleagues will understand. What is close with ruble and Russian soldier is 200. 200 is the course, and 200 is the sign of a corpse, a dead man. That's what it's connected. And I'm sorry to say, but Russian authorities lied to their people. They said there are no casualties in Ukraine. There have been more than 5,000 soldiers of Russia killed. They come in Ukraine without phones. Their parents and their wives do not know where they are. They say when they're being captured, they have been sent to trainings, to Crimea or to Belarus, to trainings, and then they were ordered to go where they do not know. And we know your plan. You want to take off the authority, to kill the president, to put your Muppet head of government or whatever. But you lost the sense of Ukraine long, long ago. This plan will never happen, and you should be, very ashamed of what you do with threatening the whole world.
Okay, it's a question of who's getting hurt economically and who's getting hurt strategically. But tonight, the one worry is we cannot guarantee safety and security to the people of Kiev. The greatest irony is that these talks are happening under the shadow of a nuclear threat, at a time when the people of Kiev are being bombed. This war is taking a very dangerous turn. The West should also stop thinking that it will remain bilateral. Nothing in the world is bilateral anymore. Before other countries are forced to come in, before the conflict escalates, I think it's time for the West also to play a greater role, and of course for China to continue to pretend to hide. Ladies and gentlemen, we're bringing you non-stop coverage here on the Republic Media Network, the only network in the world, the only English news network globally which is presenting all sides. And this is coming to you live from New Delhi tonight. I shall see you tomorrow. Good night and goodbye.